IVM.
We are here to remind you to pay your credit card bills because paying on time is a good policy. Credit Power Play gives you a chance to win 100% cashback during the first 6 overs of both innings of any IPL match. Just pay your credit card bill and stand to win 100% cashback. Welcome to All Things Policy, a daily podcast by the Takshashila Institution. We are a bunch of policy nerds based in Bengaluru, and we like bringing fresh perspectives to Indian affairs and Indian perspectives to global affairs. So grab a cup of coffee, sit back, and join us for today's chat.
Hello and welcome to All Things Policy. We frequently discuss the relations between China and other countries and the equations those countries have between themselves. Usually this is in the context of the Quad, for example. Today we want to go a little further. We want to look at the equation between the United States and the United Kingdom and what that means for the strategy that these two states employ vis-a-vis both China and Russia. This is a fairly interesting topic because the US and UK are always considered to have a special partnership, really, since the Second World War. In reality, of course, this relationship is multi-layered, it's complicated, and it's had its own problems. So what I want to do today is to discuss the future of this relationship in the context of Russia and China. And I have with me Aditya Pareek to discuss this. Welcome, Aditya.
Thank you, Aditya. It's great to be back on the show.
Absolutely. Like I just said, the US and the UK have had this really complicated relationship, right? The United States broke away from the United Kingdom in the 1780s. They went to war in 1812-13. And through the 19th century, you had a series of minor confrontations and standoffs, as well as diplomatic crises between the US and the UK. And one of the most amazing things that happened in the late 19th century, early 20th century is that you had actually a peaceful power transition from the British Empire to the United States. This is not something that normally happens historically. Everybody has theories for this, but one big reason is, of course, simply the rise of Germany. And it was this rise of Germany, the subsequent conflict, the First World War, where you saw the emergence of the United States as a global power. And by the time of the Second World War, of course, this was solidified. And Great Britain had by then become an unsinkable aircraft carrier just off the coast of Europe. Aditya, before we get into Russia, China, and strategy in the early 21st century, can you just quickly run us through what the US-UK relationship has been like since 1945?
Sure, Aditya. So, let me invoke George Orwell first, because, in popular imagination, the way the UK has kind of shrunk from being a superpower to being a great power in the post-war era is, I don't know, it's best captured by George Orwell's 1984. So it's one of the most unflattering fictional depictions of the UK. And in that dystopian novel, 1984, Orwell takes a dig at the UK as Airstrip 1, which is commonly understood to be the UK in the novel's fictional setting. And that place is reduced to being an extension of the burgeoning US military industrial complex and security umbrella during the Cold War. So that was the dark satire of that book, which called the UK Airstrip 1. And if you look at it objectively, without going into minute detail, without actually analyzing it from afar, it actually looks like the UK did kind of sort of fit in that role, being sort of playing second fiddle to the US's security umbrella. Well, with the end of the British Empire coinciding with the post-war cash crunch, the financial crisis that the United Kingdom was subject to, because Britain, funded its empire, its imperial pursuits, its power projection through its colonies. It would be fair to say, from their natural resources. So once that was no longer in the picture, UK's fortunes and its power projection capability had to shrink. So I think this coinciding with the perceived threat post-World War II from the Soviet Union, which was on an upward trajectory. So I don't think this was too far from reality, what this dark satire of Orwell was talking about. However, I think it's arguably also true that there are some instances during the Cold War where the UK did possess some agency outside of the NATO security umbrella and the US's influence. It can be gouged from the Suez Crisis in 1956, where President Ike was pretty eyed about it, that the United Kingdom, France, and Israel had hashed a plot against Gamal Abdel Nasser. So you can see that UK had agency there outside of the US influence. And then during the Falklands War, although not as radical and as going against the US or that kind of a thing. But in 1982, during the Falklands War, the UK's expeditionary forces took back the Falkland Islands from Argentina. I think that also was a moment that was celebrated in at least the British press, or rather the international press. I remember it was the Newsweek cover which had the aircraft carrier with Harriers on it, and it had that headline, "The Empire Strikes Back." So I think the UK did possess agency outside of US influence in at least some instances during the Cold War. I think the special relationship that most people talk about when they talk about bilateral relations between the US and UK, even on multilateral platforms where those two are engaged. So the special relationship can be gouged from in modern times, I guess. Polaris supply deal to the UK, the nuclear delivery systems that the UK at the time was not able to develop on its own, although it had the technical wherewithal, but it just didn't have the money on hand during those decades to pursue a nuclear delivery system on its own, which would be as effective. So the Polaris nuclear delivery system was granted to the UK from the US, which served on board UK's strategic ballistic missile submarines, which were of their own design, although. So I think the US hasn't really done something similar for any of its allies other than the UK. And well, UK has also has the distinction of being part of the Five Eyes intelligence grouping that consists of the Anglosphere, UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and the US, obviously. So, and I think going to the 1980s, US President Ronald Reagan and UK's Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, when they were in office, they had this kind of a united front against the Soviet Union and the Eastern Bloc, which I don't think has been paralleled in recent times. I think their conservative right wing politics was something that was in sharp contrast to the socialist world at the time. And well, the Reagan rhetoric of the empire of evil also quite resonated with the UK and Margaret Thatcher. And they had a united front on confronting the Soviet Union, its spheres of influence, reducing them, and in general, dismantling the Iron Curtain, so to say. And I think since then, post the Soviet collapse, I think the UK has been part of all major US and NATO initiatives, like the intervention in Kosovo, the war on terror, the war in Afghanistan and Iraq, and very recently the concept of free and open Indo-Pacific, which the US champions and the UK also agrees with.
Yeah, let's just get into that now because we've seen, for example, like you pointed out, the British being actively involved in the Falklands intervention in 1999, getting into Afghanistan immediately in October 2001, and then joining the Americans in their so-called coalition of willing in the invasion of Iraq 2003. Now, over here, we've seen in these cases, we've seen a great deal of convergence between the United States and the United Kingdom. But obviously, these two countries have different geographies. They have very different interests in some respects. How has the UK responded to the rise of China, and especially after Brexit in 2016? Has there been a clear divergence in the approach of both countries to the rise of China?
The UK has a vastly different relationship with China compared to the US. I mean, let me take you back to the handover of Hong Kong to China when the treaty under which the UK was in possession of it. So it was handed over to China willingly. We've talked about this briefly in our Northern Ireland podcast. So, I mean, the last governor of the United Kingdom who actually was present at the ceremony where the UK's flag was taken down. So I think that's a moment that kind of is a microcosm of how the UK has dealt with China, non-confrontation is my analysis. So I think UK, although post Brexit, not part of the EU, follows a very similar approach to China. It realizes that China is an emergent superpower, or at least to more equal among the equal greater powers. So I think they look at China as a trade partner, a valuable trade partner. And just like the other countries in the EU, they looked at to China from a different lens on human rights, a different lens on trade issues, a different lens on finances, and a different lens on security cooperation, or rather confrontation, when it came to that. So I think broadly the security policy of the UK has been in line with the US, because it is also part of the same security umbrella, and its security interests in Asia at least, and the Pacific match with the USS and the rest of NATO. But I don't think they are quite ready to discount China as a threat in all domains. So I think you can get a reading of this in the integrated review document that we've also talked about on this podcast, that recently came out. So in that document, the UK makes it a point to refer to China simply as a systemic competitor, a systemic challenge. So that's not a threat. That's something that's part of the course, part of the action plan. You just have to be wary of its influence on your supply chains, its influence on your trade balances, that sort of a thing. But it's not somebody who's going to come and invade you, who's going to cause you harm on your own home territory through violence. So China isn't really being antagonized, let me say that directly, by the UK. However, the US takes a very hawkish approach, so to say, to China. So you can gauge this from, say, the recent meeting in Alaska, Anchorage, between Chinese diplomats and US state officials, and that was a pretty explosive, kind of almost undiplomatic affair. So you can see the kind of rhetoric coming out of the US and China, both in terms of, say, for the past presidency of Donald Trump, there was a proper trade war, which hasn't quite subsided as of yet. Biden has chosen to keep the tariffs in place for the moment, as far as I know. So I think, and South China Sea is something that the US and China spar about quite a bit because of freedom of navigation patrols from the US Navy, and China's attempts to, I don't know, squat into other countries' EEZs in the region, Spratly Islands being the most recent example. So I think the US and UK's approach is quite different in that sense.
Right. Speaking of Spratlys, what is the UK's approach to the free and open Indo-Pacific concept? They seem to have bought into it. But what exactly do they say about it?
Well, I think broadly, when talking about a multilateral platform, or speaking at the NATO forums, they're always in agreement with the US, and they also believe in the free and open Indo-Pacific concept. And I think the latest deployment of their new flagship aircraft carrier and her carrier battle group, which is being called the Carrier Strike Group 2021, made up of Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier, HMS Queen Elizabeth, which, let me bring this up. The UK's MOD has been referring to the ship for some reason as the namesake of their current monarch. Let me tell our listeners that it is not, in fact. The ship is actually named after a World War One dreadnought battleship, and that was named after Queen Elizabeth I. So it's definitely not a namesake of the current monarch. It's namesake of a World War One ship. That's a lot of semantics there, but I think that was quite funny that the UK's MOD is talking about this incorrectly on Twitter and in their official press releases. So I think the UK is on board with hosting American expeditionary power on their own platforms. So I remember quite recently on the 20th, I think, a multinational exercise made up of, I think, mostly NATO nations. It's called Strike Warrior 21, I think. It concluded in Scotland. It was off the waters of Scotland. So the Queen Elizabeth class aircraft carrier was hosting United States Marine Corps aviation assets, them being F-35B fighter aircrafts, and the UK's own Royal Navy, Royal Air Force shared F-35Bs. So there's a squadron that has both pilots from the Royal Navy and the Royal Air Force. So they hosted about 18 F-35Bs. I think the squadron is called number 617, and the US Marine Corps squadron was also there. So there were also 4 Wildcat to attack helicopters, Merlin Mark II anti-submarine warfare helicopters, and Merlin Mark IV commando transports for the Royal Marines. So I think they've sent a very potent package, which I think departed this weekend, I think Sunday evening or so, on a 7-month long deployment to the Indo-Pacific. So people are seeing this as a kind of move that's going to rile up China. But I don't think that's where this is going. So let me bring up this point about how this sort of a burden sharing thing is going on between the US and UK when countering and counterbalancing their primary adversaries. So I think there was this recent meeting between Sergei Lavrov, who's the foreign minister of Russia, and Antony Blinken, who's the Secretary of State of the United States. So it went to quarterly well for some reason, which was surprising for both sides. And although they differed on major issues like Ukraine, etc., so and the rules-based order which the US preaches, so they differed on those points, but it was quite cordial. And it's in direct contrast to the Alaska Anchorage meeting, which was pretty explosive and almost undiplomatic between Chinese officials and US officials. So I think there's some sort of a burden sharing going on here where the UK is looking to, consider Russia an active threat, as it calls it in the integrated review. And let me also bring this up that there is tangible evidence that at least from the UK's MOD side, that Russia is physically threatening their security. And the US, I think, is taking this approach where it focuses on China as the primary adversary and wants a tentative peace with Russia. So the UK is basically prioritizing Russia as its primary adversary, while the US does the same for China. And for the other adversary left on both sides, they just kind of not trying to antagonize them anymore, if that makes sense.
Sure, that makes sense. We should also add that for all the talk about the UK withdrawing from east of Suez and so on, the UK actually has 7 points of presence in the Indian Ocean region as well. So the UK is very much present through the Royal Navy in the Indo-Pacific, and that's not counting obviously extensive economic ties with the area, which is a huge engine of growth for the whole world. I just getting back to what you were talking about on Russia. I want to ask you very specifically about Nord Stream 2, because the British have criticized it, but the Americans seem to be taking a different approach. What is the status of that?
Well, quite recently, a story was published by a website which was quoting insiders that Antony Blinken, we've discussed this previously as well in our Nord Stream 2 episode on this podcast, that Antony Blinken has this view that they don't want to alienate Germany by sanctions its interests in the Nord Stream 2 pipeline. And this this was something that Antony Blinken wrote in his 1987 book, which we've also talked about in that podcast. So I highly recommend our listeners check that podcast out. So Antony Blinken's, I think, a broad stance on the matter has not shifted much. And Biden administration, under his advice, I think, has taken this approach that they're not going to sanction the consortium company which runs Nord Stream 2, which is Nord Stream AG2. So that's a corporate consortium mainly made up of Russia's state hydrocarbon company, Gazprom, and a bunch of junior investors from European companies, especially German and Dutch ones. So I think to pragmatically safeguard its national security interest, the United States has chosen not to push any more punishment onto Germany because of any sanctions that might, hurt them in the crossfire. So I think this move can also be seen as that equation that I was just talking about in the answer to the previous question, that the United States kind of wants a tentative peace while it with Russia while it focuses on China.
Yeah, absolutely. The only problem there is whether they'll get it or not. Now, before we wrap up, I just want to get back to the UK. Now, the UK has cited, obviously, like you pointed out, Russia as this major challenge, especially with, as they would put it, challenging the security of Europe. But is there also in any way a direct naval challenge to the United Kingdom from Russia?
I'm glad you asked that because most recently Captain Ben Wallace, he served in the British Army during the times of the Troubles, and he was a officer in the Scots Guards regiment, if I recall correctly. So in his political life, he's always been about the security interests of the United Kingdom, and very recently, I think 2-3 days ago, he spoke to the press and he was talking about how the Russians and the Russian Navy has been threatening the physical security of the United Kingdom very close to shores. So he said during that statement that Russia remains the number one adversary threat to the United Kingdom, and they've spotted Russian submarines and warships in the past year, 2020, in the Irish Sea, and they've spotted Russian warships and other assets, including submarines, around the entire coastline of the United Kingdom. So very recently, they spotted a Kilo class diesel electric submarine of the Russian Navy in the Irish Sea, which, as he recalled, was the first time. This has not happened before. So the GUIK gap was one of the big issues for the Western Bloc during the Cold War. And I don't think the importance of the GUIK gap has reduced at all. Even if other theaters in the world have gotten more attention in previous decades. So I think the physical security is also threatened by other assets. Say, for example, UK has been a leader in bringing up submarine cables as an avenue of security cooperation and perceived threat from Russia. So, as we know, the Russian Federation ship Yantar, which is basically seen as a spy ship that goes around snooping at submarine cables, and it's tracked by the open source intelligence community online and Western forces in general, NATO forces in general, as this sort of a spy ship that can potentially damage submarine cables and snoop on them. So I think those two concerns, the physical security from naval assets that come just far too close to UK's shores, as well as the submarine cables bit, I think that's been the primary motivator why the UK feels this way. And I think if you are to reach for it, the UK also talks about the poisoning of Sergei Skripal. So I think the whole business with the FSB trying to poison him with Novichok quite similarly to how Alexei Navalny's case. So I think the UK is concerned about, again, I hate to bring it up, but Gibrit Naya Voina, hybrid war, which the UK sees as a threat, as Russia also sees as a threat in its own system. So yeah, it's war by any means when it's conditions less than war.
Sure. The reason Aditya Pareek just laughed when he said hybrid war is we generally find it an amusing concept. Anyway, but thanks a lot, Aditya. You've given us a sense of how the UK especially looks at both Russia and China and how that plays out in the US-UK relationship. So thank you so much. That special relationship is still actually a very interesting relationship.
Thank you, Aditya.
Thank you. And thank you all for joining us on All Things Policy.
If you liked our show, don't forget to check out other interesting podcasts on the IVM network. You can tune into them on the IVM Podcast app, ivmpodcast.com, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. You can also follow IVM on social media. The handle is @IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. And hey, if you'd like to dive into Takshashila's research on technology, strategy, and economic affairs, check us out at our Twitter handle @TakshashilaINST or our website takshashila.org.in.
I hope you enjoyed that show. If you aren't following us on social media, please do. We're IVM Podcasts on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. I would like to thank the sponsors on the network this week, Cred, Ciet, and PayPal. Thank you so much. You make everything possible. Before I recommend a couple of episodes, I just wanted to quickly talk a little bit about Ankush Champanerkar. Ankush was a team member who we lost due to COVID-related complications. He was a really fun guy, and I wish I knew him better than I got to know him in the short time he was with us. But I hope that you can remember him in your thoughts and prayers. Also, quick reminder about Pod for Change, the initiative set up by the podcasting community, along with Give India, the NGO partner. You can go to tinyurl.com/podforchangeindia, and I'm sure that it would be much appreciated any donations that you could give. With that, let me quickly give you a couple of highlights from this week. Aditi Mittal was on Cyrus Says. Great episode, do check that out. On the Habit Coach, Ashton talks about using the word impossible and suggests some better alternatives. On Advertising is Dead, Varun was joined by Harsh Lal, the co-founder of the Soul Store. On This Round is on me, Gauri talks to Pankit Desai, who is the co-founder and CEO of Secure Tech. And finally, I'd like to mention that we have a new show called Tede Mere Raste, hosted by Keshav Chaturvedi. This time it's a trip to the beautiful blue city of Jodhpur, but every week he's going to tell you about his travels as a photographer. It's really well put together, really well done. I couldn't be more excited about the show. Please do definitely check that out. And with that, I hope we see you again next week.
From uncensored and unfiltered chats with the who's who of the entertainment industry, I, Siddharth Kannan, bring you a very hardcore chat show called Candid Kannan. Tune in every Friday on the IVM Podcast app or wherever you get your podcasts.